Yeah, I heard.
Sex Nation, Sara Gonzales, take one.
Okay. I'll let you get seated wherever you need to.
The speed is over here. You're good.
Okay, Sarah.
You can't see this cord.
Cord is okay.
Okay.
Yeah, let's just make sure the hair doesn't. Your hair is great right
Okay.
now. Okay. Yeah, so my first question is if you can just speak to me about what you've seen in the changing of the narrative in the media about truly what is evil and what is sin. Now we're calling it good. If you can speak to what you've seen in specific examples of maybe how the left has repurposed language for their agenda.
I think when I talk about how the left has repurposed, words to further their agenda, the thing that most sticks out to me, specifically in this time period, is a time period where we are talking about pedophilia, right? We're talking about adults who are trying to have sex with children, yet all of the academia will call this minor attracted persons now, right? So we are supposed to have empathy for them because we're not supposed to call them pedophiles. That would be stigmatizing. To suggest that someone having sex with children is wrong, that would be too stigmatizing. So we are supposed to call them minor attracted persons to invoke some sort of empathy within yourself for these people, because to call them minor attracted persons makes it sound like they don't have any control over it. It's not their fault. And so we are supposed to normalize something like that. We also talk a lot about abortion in the news cycle. Of course, that is something that is always at the forefront of the news cycle, especially now. And you just think about what they have done to weaponize what they are doing to babies in the womb. They're just calling it reproductive health care, which I would say, if the intended goal of the medical procedure is death in every single event, that probably isn't very good health care. Yet that is the word choice that the left uses to perpetuate their narrative, is that how can you be against women's reproductive health care? How can you be against women receiving health care? You are a bad person if you don't accept that women deserve and are empowered by killing their own babies in the womb. And it's really scary when you see how far they've gone. I mean, even if you talk about Black Lives Matter, you are a racist if you don't believe that Black Lives Matter. How can you not possibly believe that Black Lives Matter when in reality, even if you went to Black Lives Matter's own website, you could see that it was nothing about Black lives. They haven't spent any money trying to help Black communities. It's all about the destruction of the family unit and Marxism, even in their own words, if you go to their website, yet they were still able to use the language and repurpose it in order to drive their narratives. It's really scary.
If you would, stretch your brain a little bit more for me, and I'm really looking for what you're sharing is amazing, but front and center at the very beginning of this documentary, we're actually going to feature a few people speaking about different examples throughout culture of language reappropriation. So I'm thinking about even examples of like domestic terrorist, that term being used, or it's hard for me to come up with examples myself, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so domestic terrorists, I'm just trying to make sure that I know the examples that I want to go to.
Yeah. What happened? That was our battery. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was your break.
I think just extremists in general.
Yeah.
Like, what does Joe Biden say? Ultra MAGA?
Ultra MAGA, hate speech. They'll use it in both ways. They'll use a positive term for a negative thing,
right,
and a negative term for a positive thing.
Right. Extremists.
Thank you, Dan.
I think just words that have taken on a different meaning than what they used to have.
I saw
Hold for me. I think that's too harsh. I think the settings changed. No. Okay, let me look at my phone real quick. I'm probably just going crazy. No, I think. Where is my phone now? Because I had a photo. I don't want to get this wrong. Here we go.
It definitely seems like it got hot.
Yeah, it does feel brighter.
Okay, no worries.
In my peripheral.
It was at 32 32%, so I'm not,
That's where it is.
yeah, we're good then.
Maybe it was just the starkness of
Saturday,
Yeah,
some too.
the,
work.
yeah.
Good deal.
Okay.
All right, thanks for bearing with us.
Sure,
Okay, you feel good about answering that?
I think so.
Ready when you are.
Sure. So when you talk about the left's attempts to repurpose language to make bad things good and good things bad, what comes to mind is, we're talking about all of this January 6th hearings, the January 6th investigation. We are now supposed to believe that nonviolent people who went out trying to make their First Amendment rights heard, they are domestic terrorists. And we saw this happen in incremental ways because the left is very, very careful to do things incrementally when they are trying to change the culture. And so they started out very softly and saying, of course, anyone who is violent at any protest anywhere should have consequences for that. But then they started into these nonviolent protesters, and we are to believe that if you wear a red hat and you happen to be Christian or conservative, you are now labeled a domestic terrorist. We're also seeing that term domestic terrorist used within schools. You're seeing parents come to school board meetings and simply be telling these school board members, you do not have the right to dictate what happens to my child. You do not have the right to instill your morals on my child. What I say is more important than what you want to indoctrinate my child with. And you are having the Department of Justice, this is the highest justice department in the entire country. You are having the Department of Justice use the term domestic terrorist to label these parents as such simply because they are trying to invoke their own parental rights for their own children. I mean, you were seeing this happen all across the country. You saw, Brian Stelter, who is now no longer with CNN, but he went on the air oftentimes talking about MAGA media and MAGA extremists and how they don't like they're very anti-government. They don't like big government and how wrong that was. And I sat back to myself and I said, how in the world did we get this far? We're saying that a certain group of people were anti-government was a bad thing. I thought that we could all agree that big government only leads to disaster if we look throughout history. And here we are trying to say that if you believe in small government, if you believe in lower taxes, if you believe in conserving what there is left to conserve, if you believe in the right to life, that you are somehow an extremist, a radical, an ultra MAGA, a domestic terrorist. It's getting really scary out there.
I agree with you. Yeah, we're losing our ability to just speak freely at this point. And you led into my next question, actually. So I was going to ask you about some of your concerns as a mother of a young son. And you have two, but one of them was in public school at one point in time. What concerns did you have?
So I had a lot of concerns when my older son was in public school. It broke my mama heart that at the time I was a single mom and I had to make the decision to send him to public school. Well, that lasted all of a semester because of the disaster that public school was. Let's talk about the fact that they didn't want our children to breathe freely and breathe oxygen. Let's talk about the fact that, the kindergarten through 5th grade were walking through the hallways of a mural that was on the wall for all of the children to see. That was a Black Lives Matter fist that was put in the air that, of course, would lead to questions that would then have to be answered, not by me as the parent, but by the teacher who was there to answer the question. Who knows what that teacher would have said? And so, it's been a very long journey and a very long vetting process to be able to find schools that are not going to try to indoctrinate our children, especially when we're talking about young men, because young men are very much the victims right now of being sexually indoctrinated and being confused into believing that they should be more feminine, that they should in fact not only be more feminine, that they should just decide that they too can be a woman. And so these young boys are very, very vulnerable to that in the school system right now. I wish I could say that it was just public schools. Unfortunately, it's also infiltrating into private schools where parents are spending a lot amount of money to make sure that their children are not being indoctrinated into that. But if parents are not paying attention, it is happening in their schools. We report on these stories all the time where these private, oftentimes religious schools have the exact same LGBTQ curriculum that these public schools have. There's no difference in the curriculum. The parents don't know it because they're not paying attention, they're not looking at the work, they're not talking to their child, but it's happening, and it's going to lead to disasters for this generation as they grow up and grow out of the school system and become adults.
You mentioned young men, young male boys. Could you speak to the term toxic masculinity and your thoughts on that?
Toxic masculinity is an oxymoron in itself because masculinity inherently is not toxic. If someone is behaving in a way that is toxic, that is not masculine. That is something completely different. A lot of feminists would point to, men being violent.
Let's hold real quick. Sure, you okay? Yeah. You were saying, sorry about that. That was
That's okay.
literally on speed dial or something.
Oh, that's okay.
A lot of feminists would point to, you said something.
Yes. A lot of feminists would point to the idea that men are more violent. They are prone to more violence. I would say absolutely, and that's a good thing. That's why we want the men in our military. That's why we want men in combat. That's why we want to make sure that they can harness that into powers of good, right, and not evil. And if any man is abusing their wife, abusing their children, that is not masculinity. That is something completely different. But the left wants to lump the two together because they want to feminize our men. They want to emasculate them while they make their women more masculine. And the way that they do that is by confusing these young men into thinking that all of these innate feelings that they have, that they want to protect, that they want to provide, all of these feelings that are completely normal for young men to feel, they are being told that they need to repress those feelings because that is in fact toxic. And so, of course, how else would you expect these young boys, these young men to grow up other than being completely confused about who they are, about who they're supposed to be, about what is good, what is a good man, what does society deem a good man? They're growing up completely confused, thinking, if I want to provide for my family, that's toxic. If I want to, go to combat because I feel like it's my duty, my patriotic duty as an American citizen, that's toxic. They're being told and fed all of these lies, and I think we're seeing that, especially when we talk about the mental health of young men and women coming out in this next generation. We're seeing it in their mental health and their stability. They're being completely confused, and it's leading to disastrous results.
Okay, so Yaku wants y'all to hear certain questions that he wants to talk about. Okay. So he wants to pull in, so.
Hi, Yaku.
Hi, Rebecca. Yeah, that's why I asked you guys to call me quick before Sarah went in.
Oh, that's funny.
So what have you covered?
So far, we've covered language reappropriation, and we've started to speak about her concerns as a mother of a young son who went to public school for a semester.
Yeah, so make sure you get that out of Sarah.
Yeah.
Sorry we were late, Sarah.
That's okay.
But then also what I want you to do is a wealth of knowledge on how the left is just changing culture through all angles. So just give her the opportunity to speak freely about confusing language. I know you did that, but particularly about the family. Going after destructing the family. Among the other questions that I gave you, we can get through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to stay on the line?
No, I can't. No, it would be a bother if I stay on the line. I don't want to bother you guys. What else do you have on your list right now for Sarah? Just run them by me real quick. I want to make sure we cover everything with her.
Sure, yeah. We'll cover that, how the narrative is being changed toward family, but we're also going to speak about how U.S. culture has changed the sexuality of women, what happened in the culture that has resulted in feminist groups not fighting to stop the exploitation of women. In mass media and entertainment, how does the idea that sex sells increase demand for a sexualized relationship standard? Are women
Yeah,
feeling...
I think all those questions, right? Less specificity and leave it more open so that Sarah can pull from her. So think of every question, Sarah, as you've got a blank canvas.
Okay.
Go in that direction.
Okay.
Because it doesn't have to be so specific, right? Because Sarah's got a vast intake. She gets massive amounts of information every day.
Yeah.
So I don't want to limit her answers too narrowly, right? So just keep it open
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, all right, amazing. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, guys, bless you. Thank you.
Bless you.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Any of my questions, if I'm going one direction, you think, this needs to go the other direction.
Okay.
Take it there.
Okay.
Yeah, we trust what you see, what you know, and that's really the purpose of this.
Do I sound like I know what I'm talking about at
Yeah,
all? Okay.
Definitely, yeah. That's why I wanted to call and make sure. So, so we were speaking about, remind me, were we still on
Toxic masculinity, yeah.
Okay, so you can wrap up your thought in any way if you still had more to say about that.
I think I finished it.
That's good.
Okay.
So that does lead into my next question. So you coming from a Latina culture, how are Latinas raised to view sex and sexuality?
In the Latina culture, in the Latino culture. In the Latino culture, I would say that it is, it's a very religious, God-fearing culture. And so there isn't a ton of talk about, sexual promiscuity. Certainly there's not, you don't have your families encouraging sexual promiscuity just because it is, as I said, very religious. Large percentage is, of course, Catholic and strongly devout, which is why it is we're seeing that all of these Latinos, Hispanics, are rejecting what the left is doing. They're doing it for a lot of reasons, some of which are because they are so religious, they don't appreciate the forcing of, trying to say that reproductive health care is okay when they know in reality you're talking about killing a child in the womb. They also do not accept all of this changing of the language that we're doing on saying that men can be women and women can be men. They don't appreciate people trying to teach that to their children, and they will make their voices known. And so when we talk about sexual promiscuity, I think that what's more important to look at is the sexual indoctrination that is happening with all of these Hispanic families, because I got to tell you, as a Latina, if you come for my kids, you better be prepared to pay for that at some point, because I'm going all in against you. And I think that that's how a lot of Latina moms at least feel. Certainly a lot of Latina families, they value hard work, they value God, they value their families. They are very close-knit, and they don't want government interference. They don't want indoctrination of their children without their consent. And so I think that we are seeing a lot of Latina and Latinos pushing back against this narrative, especially when it comes to changing the language and making their children believe that they can be, gender is fluid and they can be whatever they want to be. I think we're going to see even more pushback coming because, as I've seen in news and media, the left doesn't course correct. They have the opportunity to course correct, and they don't do it. Instead, they choose to double down and go all in. And so it'll be interesting to see, but I got to tell you, speaking as someone who is from the culture, I don't think Latinos are going to put up with it for much longer.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is a big, broad question I have for you next, but how does an open border affect that mentality in the Latino culture towards sexuality?
That is a broad question. How does that mentality?
How does the open border situation
Okay.
that you see,
Uh-huh.
in your words, how does that affect the mentality towards sexuality in the Latino culture?
So we see open borders. Hold on. There's a big problem at our southern border, and I use the term border loosely because we basically don't have one at this point, and we have all of these illegal immigrants pouring across our borders. They haven't been properly vetted. Oftentimes they are coming with obviously bad intentions, whether it be, selling drugs to young children. I mean, we just talked about this rainbow fentanyl that is, that is now prevalent. Who do you think that they are trying to give this fentanyl to? Who are they trying to attract when you have rainbow-colored fentanyl that looks like candy? Of course, it's the children. You also have, of course, the people who, I'm sorry to say, but a lot of times we talk about in the news that these are people who are coming in with bad intentions, whether it be raping women, whether it be raping young children. We talked about all too recently a man that was actually charged with raping a very young girl. I believe she was 10 years old. And he was charged. He was, in fact, an illegal immigrant, which is why the left wanted to keep that identity a secret, because these are people who are coming in and they don't all mean all well for your children, right? So you see President Trump, and he was so demonized when he said there are rapists and there are murderers coming across our southern borders. He was demonized for that, but it's absolutely true. And it's not just that he's saying it's from Mexico. When you have open borders, you have people from Iran coming in, you have people from Honduras, from El Salvador, from all sorts of places coming in through the southern border because they know that they will get in. The Latino culture is, as much as the left likes to say that if maybe if your skin tone is brown, if you come from a Hispanic background, you must support open borders, you must support illegal immigrants because they're your own people. That's actually not the case. We see it as a slap in the face to anyone who has done this the legal way. My great-grandparents, my grandparents did this the right way. And we don't just accept and embrace allowing all of these strangers to come in, because we recognize that these same strangers are going to be in our communities. They're going to be around our children. And we don't know who in the world they are. Certainly we don't want that to continue to happen. And so I think that the left is overplaying their hand, that they think that they just have the Latino vote in the bag all the time, because we see what's happening right now, and we are just as appalled as anyone else in society.
It's really good. Thank you very much. Would you pull your hair away from the mic?
Yes.
There we go. You should be okay. Yeah, so my next question is this. Feminist groups they don't seem to be fighting this rampant exploitation of women on multiple levels. You've got pornography, you've got what's the word, like coercion within relationships,
Mm-hmm.
you've got trafficking, you've got the whole gamut. What do you think is driving that?
I think what is driving the lack of feminists speaking out against things like females being sex trafficked and coercion between partners and things of that nature is that for so long feminists have tried to tell women that sex is the only way that they can be empowered, that sexual promiscuity is the only way that they can be empowered, that there are in fact no consequences for this sexual promiscuity. It's actually the best way to live. And in order to call out all of these things that are happening, all of these women that are being trafficked, all of the consequences of this feminist movement, they would have to in fact acknowledge that they were wrong and that there are consequences. And they can't do that, because by acknowledging that, they would acknowledge that they were selling all of these females, all of these women, a complete and total lie. I liken it to the abortion movement within feminism. They're trying to empower these women to think that the way that they can be a woman is by killing their child in the womb. And so you have these women, these young women who are hearing this. They're hearing all of these older generation of women tell them, you should be proud to kill your own baby. You should be proud to have an abortion. Don't worry about it. It will be the best experience you've ever had in your whole life. Try it. And they do. And they had no idea that it would make them feel immense amounts of guilt, of regret, of sadness, of trauma that they have to carry throughout their entire life, because the feminist movement completely lied to them. They do it all the time. And I just think it's very sad, because there are a lot of young women who have been duped by these feminists who are telling them sexual promiscuity is good, you should create an entire lifestyle around it, there are no consequences for it, nor should there be, and who are telling them you should kill your own baby. And there are women who are growing up and they have to bear that regret, they have to bear that guilt for the rest of their lives.
That's excellent, thank you. You're right, yeah, I do need to change the card real quick. But my next question, if you could think about this,
Sure.
You have already heavily touched on this, but I would love to get, like Yaku was saying on the phone, just a blanket, your opinion on what if the left had an ideal America, like if the left side of the aisle,
Mm-hmm.
what they would love to see, what's their end game, is there an agenda?
Mm-hmm.
And if you could, within that answer, revisit some of the ways that they're using language
Okay.
to propitiate that.
Okay.
And actually, hold on.
Okay.
I'm just gonna clap real quick.
Okay, so set it up for me one more time so I
Sure.
can set it up in my answer.
If the left had their way, what would America look like? And along this process, how are they using language to further that goal?
If the left had their way, when it comes down to it, they want society as confused as possible. They want the men to be confused into thinking that they're women. They want the women to be confused into thinking that they're men, because they want to destroy the family unit. If they destroy the family unit, they have the control, they have the power. They are the dad and the mom and everyone else who holds all of the cards. That's them when they destroy the family unit. And so they're doing this very, very methodically, very carefully, by teaching children that they are going to be trans, or that they must be, young girls must be lesbians if they enjoy climbing trees and not wearing dresses. They're very intentional with their words. They're encouraging women that they don't need to raise a family, that they should just be just like men, equal to men. Go do your career, don't worry about a family. In fact, if you end up getting pregnant because of your poor decisions, don't worry, you can just trash that baby so that you can have your career. I mean, they're doing this intentionally because they want everyone dependent on the government. If people create families, if they have strong family units, they don't need anyone else telling them what to do. They don't need that. And so the left, of course, has been very intentional in their plan to want a state of just complete government dependence. And that is the way, that is their aim to do it. I mean, you talk about repurposing language in order to meet that agenda. Look no further than, men can be women and women can be men. Biological men are able to swim in women's sports and win titles and take those titles away from women. You talk about, as I mentioned before, you talk about reproductive health care being used to express something that is actually the opposite of health care, because the intended goal in every single procedure is to eliminate a life. It is for death. They want death in this procedure 100% of the time. But they call it reproductive health care, and they hope that you'll buy into it. It's terms like these, extremist, if you happen to believe in small government and lower taxes and the government leaving you alone. If you want to be left alone by the government, you are considered an extremist by the left. They're taking all of these words that used to mean that you were strong and independent and a free thinker and pro-family, and you know what? We are God-fearing because that's what this country was founded upon. And they've taken these words and they've weaponized it to use against us because they want to create confusion. They want to create complete chaos so that everyone can turn to Big Daddy government to be able to come in and solve the problem, which of course we all know they won't do.
Wonderful. Okay. Let's shift a little bit to mass media and entertainment, your world, and this idea that sex sells. What do you have to say about that? And when you look at what's happening in the landscape, in our culture, and how people are being abused, do you see any kind of connection?
I think when we look at the idea in mass media that sex sells, there's way too much truth to that. There's a ton of truth to that. I do think that it's a travesty that pornography is available at your fingertips, right? You have a computer, you have a tablet, your child has a computer, has a tablet, has a phone, and they can access pornography that they have absolutely no business seeing. It's been, as I said, just a complete travesty that we have allowed our young people to have access to this, because what it's done is created an overly sexualized society. And that's all that people want to see, and it's all that people want to talk about. And I find it very sad, especially for women who, these feminists will say, well, you should use your body as a weapon. You should use, your body because sex sells. But in the end, they're the ones who are most damaged by that. Women are the ones who are most damaged by doing that, because we have these young men who are doing horrible things to women. It's resulted in more trafficking situations. It's resulted in more domestic violence and sexual assault situations, especially within people who are already in relationships, because these men have access to this material, and they're creating this entirely different idea of what real life is supposed to be like and what sex is supposed to be. They don't think that sex is supposed to be in between a man and a woman who are married and in a relationship and have a life together. They think that it is just something to do just for fun, and you can discard the person afterwards. And so I don't think it should be a surprise that we are seeing, all of the domestic violence and the rapes and the sexual assault cases and all of these things happening across the country at much more prevalence. I don't think should be a surprise, because we've accepted that pornography is cool, pornography is fun, it's okay for married men to go and view pornography, it's okay for them to be over-sexualized, and now we see the result of that, is that you can't turn away from it. You can't get away from it. I'll give you an example. I was with my son at a video game at an arcade. I was with my son at an arcade, and he loves to play video games. He doesn't get a lot of it at home. So anytime he got straight A's the entire year last year, I said, we can do whatever you want to do. What do you want to do? He said, I want to go to this arcade. And I don't let him play the inappropriate games, but they have a game there that's just a motorcycle race. And so you think to yourself, well, this is totally fine. It's a motorcycle race. You get on the motorcycle, you do the throttle, and everything's fine. Well, at the end of the race, they have these scantily clad women cheering you on when you finish. And it's all of those little things that you don't think about because we've always been around it. We've seen it happen forever because, again, they're very intentional. They very slowly and methodically put these in all of our media so that we begin to accept it. And I stand there and I'm mortified because I'm thinking, how is my 10-year-old looking at this and doesn't have any questions, right? It's completely normal to him because they put it everywhere. And unfortunately, even when you're a parent who is as strict as I am and as careful as I am not to expose him to anything, he walks on a street corner and he sees way more than I want him to see because we have convinced society that sex is the way to get what you want and that you should be proud of showing off everything, of being sexually promiscuous. And it's just really sad. Okay.
One more time with your hair, if you want.
Oh, sure.
Approaching this side, but love you have two young sons. My last question for you is, if you could just, I know you were getting there with your thoughts, what expectations does this set for a young man who's growing up in this culture of sexualizing everything? What expectations does this young man have when he enters into his first relationship?
Mm-hmm. I think the way that society has used sexuality as the most important thing, I think the way that we have over-sexualized young men is going to lead to devastating consequences because they're going to enter into their first relationships, their intimate relationships, and they are going to expect something completely different than what their partner is likely going to expect because they have been taught all of these lies. They have been looking at pornography. They will never be satisfied. They're setting themselves up, honestly, for a completely dissatisfactory sex life. It's sad, but that's just the case. And, I think that parents need to make sure that they don't abdicate their responsibilities in protecting their children from being exposed to this, in protecting even their young men from being exposed to this, because it is setting them up for complete failures in relationships later on down the line. And you can never be too careful. And I know a lot of parents will think, well, he's 16, I'll let him do what he wants, it's totally fine. I would say no, it's not okay. I am going to keep tabs on my child until he is 18 and leaves the house because it is my job as a parent to do so. And these young men are going through all of this pornography. They're getting addicted to it. And nothing can measure up to something that is not real. And they're going to get in a real relationship, and they are not going to be successful in it. They're going to continue to get depressed because they won't have a successful relationship. They're going to continue to get more into pornography because they're depressed. It's a vicious, vicious cycle, and I think it's just disgusting that we are setting these young men, these young boys, up for these failures. But again, it's all in the left's plan to destroy the family unit and just completely transform America into this chaotic, confused state of society that just needs the government to lift them out of that mess.
Oh my goodness, that was so good.
Well, and if you had a
Was
daughter,
it?
you know.
Oh gosh.
That you know would have to deal with these
Right.
creepy guys every day
Right.
because they've
Yeah.
gone through all this. And
Right. Yeah.
Not going to find any satisfaction.
Yeah,
That's why,
it's so-
That's why the most users of Viagra right now are 18 through 25-year-olds
Ugh. That is so sad.
because they can no longer really.
Right.
Yeah,
They can't. Reach the
nope.
sexual,
Nope.
They're not satisfied.
Because
Yeah.
of seeing that.
And then the women feel horrible because they're like, I can't even do my job, right? Like, gosh.
There's no way to I love what you said. There's no way to attain to something that's not real.
Yeah.
Can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when people come away from this film, they're going to have the whole picture
Mm-hmm.
of what's going on in our culture. So that being said, everything we've talked about today, anything coming to your mind that you want to close with? I'm done with my questions. If there's anything you want to share for the film, from your heart.
How much do you touch on, I mean, I know I touched on it, but how much do you guys intend to touch on the roles of men and women being reversed?
Would love your thoughts on that.
Okay.
Because that is key. I was going to ask you, I thought about asking you a question about the glass ceiling. This imaginary glass ceiling.
Yeah. So let me say, one of the saddest things that I'm seeing today is the idea that men and women are equal in everything that they do. Because the reality is, we were created to be complementary of each other. We were not created to replace one another. And the left is treating us as if, men can be women, women can be men, not just, biologically, but also in the jobs that they do, in their responsibilities, in women caretaking the home. They're supposed to stop doing that so that they can go and, be a CEO of a company, which is great, but the left is trying to convince them that they have to embrace that in order to be equal. The fact of the matter is, we were meant to be complementary to one another, not to be replaceable. And I think that is the biggest thing that people need to remember and understand. We were created differently. That's part of the deal. Embrace it. Don't try to change it. It will only lead to unmitigated disaster.
I love that so much. It's really good.
Is it?
Yes.
Did I sound like I knew what I was talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll try to.
Is there anything else that comes to mind? I mean, open canvas for you.
Yeah. I don't think so. I mean, I feel like I kind of took it in the direction that I was thinking of in the first question that you had me reframe.
Yeah.
So I feel like I kind of said it in that, but I'm happy to
No.
add
You're
anything
gonna be
else.
So
Okay.
proud of what you gave us.
No,
I'm
Really?
I think you hit it
Yes.
3 or 4 more times.
Okay.
It's like, so I mean.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you are just tying this whole thing together.
I measure up to all your experts.
Oh my gosh. are you
Okay.
kidding me?
Okay.
You're the expert.
Okay.
You're the
Okay.
expert. I am
Okay.
pathetic.